U.S. troops stationed in Europe are on high alert this morning as Russia moves farther into Ukraine. NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce joins us now. So, Dan, catch us up here. Where do things stand at this hour in terms of how American troops are positioned in Eastern Europe? We know they're not going to go into Ukraine, but what is their job now?
Well, they have a number of missions, and one of them is symbolic, and some of them are concrete. The first is really a message to Russia not to attack NATO and all NATO members, especially those on the eastern flank that border Russia. And some of those NATO member states have very bad history with Russia, and they very much wanted reassurance. And so the U.S. and some other members of NATO have sent forces, troops, helicopters, equipment to the Baltics, to Poland, to Romania, all of those Eastern European countries inside the NATO alliance. Now, there's also the possibility that some of those U.S. troops, the 82nd Airborne, has elements in Poland. They could be helping with this likely refugee influx that we could see coming from Ukraine into Poland and into the West. And it's possible the U.S. Soldiers there would help out with that. And then also I should mention NATO had an emergency meeting this morning, and the officials there reaffirmed that they would continue to flow forces into Eastern Europe to deter Russia from trying in any way to move beyond Ukraine into the east. And there was also an appeal from the Baltic governments to arm the Ukrainian forces as much as possible to help Ukraine defend itself.
So, Dan, just to underscore what we're talking about here, I want to play White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki reiterating the Biden administration's stance on sending troops into Ukraine, as we're just discussing, and then we'll talk on the other side. Let's listen.
We are not going to be in a war with Russia or putting military troops on the ground in Ukraine fighting Russia. The president has been crystal clear and consistent. He is not sending U.S. troops to fight in Ukraine. That has not changed.
So, Dan, a few questions for you here. I mean, picking up on what you were just saying, is there any chance, any indication we could change course on that? Is this solely now about fortifying our NATO allies? But then also, you know, one of the things that we keep hearing from every reporter that we ask on the ground there is, what is this like? Civilians are taking up arms in Ukraine, and we pretty much hear that they're not a match for the Russian army. So if Ukraine is essentially fighting this alone, what does that ultimately mean if we're not going in, if other countries are not going in, and that's what their force looks like compared to Russia's?
I mean, yes, Ukraine is in a very challenging situation. To answer your question, there is no chance at this point that the U.S. or any of the NATO member states are preparing in any way or considering sending forces into Ukraine. That is clear. Now, there is a remote possibility if this conflict continues to unfold and perhaps escalate. There is always the risk of an inadvertent clash or collision where perhaps by accident a stray missile or aircraft or naval warship in the Black Sea has some interaction with a U.S. or a NATO aircraft or ship, and there could be a misunderstanding, but there is a communication channel between the U.S. and Russia, and at the moment that's considered to be a remote possibility. But in terms of Ukraine and fighting Russia, they cannot win in a straight head-to-head matchup. That's true. Their military is no match. However, it is possible that they could fight a kind of resistance, depending on where Russia tries to deploy and how much of the territory it tries to control. It's not clear that Russia could occupy or control large swaths of that country without fierce resistance from Ukraine.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.